There is a moment in life when pain changes form. At first, it hurts. Then it exhausts you. Then eventually, it becomes something else entirely. Something colder. More focused. More dangerous. Most people think the most dangerous individuals are the loud ones. The aggressive ones. The ones screaming for attention. But real danger rarely announces itself. Real danger becomes silent. Controlled. Patient. Because the most dangerous person in the world is the one who has nothing left to lose. Think about it carefully. Fear controls almost every human being on earth. Fear of rejection. Fear of failure. Fear of embarrassment. Fear of losing money. Fear of losing relationships. Fear of being judged. Those invisible fears shape how people speak, move, think, and survive. Fear keeps people obedient. Predictable. Easy to control. But once someone loses everything they once depended on emotionally, those chains begin to break. And once fear disappears, human beings become capable of extraordinary transformation. History has always feared desperate individuals for a reason. Entire empires underestimated people who had already accepted suffering. Powerful leaders lost control because they failed to understand what happens when someone mentally reaches rock bottom. Because rock bottom changes people. It forces them to see life differently. The person who once begged for approval suddenly stops caring. The person who once feared rejection suddenly speaks without hesitation. The employee who feared getting fired suddenly becomes fearless. The creator who feared criticism suddenly becomes unstoppable. The man who spent years ignored suddenly decides he no longer needs permission from anyone. The woman who spent her entire life underestimated suddenly realizes she was never weak in the first place. That transformation terrifies people because it cannot be controlled anymore. Most people only feel powerful when life is comfortable. But the individual who survived pain learns how to function without comfort entirely. And that changes everything. Because once someone survives emotional destruction, the world loses its ability to intimidate them. Suddenly failure no longer looks terrifying. Rejection no longer feels fatal. Judgment no longer matters. The person becomes emotionally detached from the opinions that once controlled them. And when that happens, they begin operating differently from everyone else around them. Calmer. Sharper. More dangerous. Most people never notice when someone begins transforming internally because the process happens quietly. No applause. No audience. No recognition. Just pain slowly reshaping a human being into something stronger. There are people walking around right now carrying silent wars inside them that nobody can see. They smile in public while rebuilding themselves privately. They sit alone at night fighting battles nobody knows about. They lose relationships, dreams, opportunities, pieces of themselves. But instead of collapsing, they adapt. And adaptation is where dangerous people are born. Because pain either destroys someone permanently, or introduces them to a version of themselves they never knew existed. There is nothing more unpredictable than a human being who no longer fears losing everything. Because once someone accepts loss completely, they stop negotiating with life. They stop hesitating. They stop waiting for permission. And that is the moment ordinary people become capable of extraordinary things. The terrifying part is that most transformations happen invisibly. Society is trained to recognize loud breakdowns, but it almost never notices silent evolution. People mistake silence for weakness, isolation for failure, exhaustion for surrender. But there is a stage of suffering where a person stops reacting emotionally and starts observing everything with brutal clarity. They begin noticing who disappeared when things became difficult. Who only respected success. Who only stayed close when there was something to gain. Pain sharpens perception in ways comfort never can. Betrayal sharpens memory. Loneliness sharpens awareness. And eventually the individual stops searching for sympathy because they realize sympathy changes nothing. That is where intensity begins building internally. Quietly. Slowly. Like pressure forming beneath the surface of a volcano. Most people have never witnessed what happens when someone spends years swallowing humiliation, rejection, disappointment, and loneliness without breaking publicly. The pressure changes them. One day the same person everyone underestimated suddenly becomes unrecognizable. Disciplined. Focused. Emotionally detached from distractions. Obsessed with growth. And everyone around them becomes confused because they assumed suffering would weaken them. But suffering does not always weaken people. Sometimes it removes weakness completely. There is a reason some of the most relentless individuals in history emerged from unbearable environments. Pain creates urgency. Comfort creates delay. The person who has lost everything develops a level of hunger that comfortable people cannot imitate. When survival becomes emotional instead of physical, the human mind adapts differently. Excuses begin disappearing. Complaining begins disappearing. Waiting for motivation disappears entirely. The individual stops depending on inspiration because survival itself becomes the motivation. They wake up every day carrying a quiet obsession to never feel powerless again. And that obsession changes how they move through life. They stop wasting time arguing with people who misunderstand them. They stop explaining themselves constantly. They stop chasing validation from individuals who never respected them to begin with. Instead, they become addicted to progress. Addicted to discipline. Addicted to becoming stronger than the version of themselves that once suffered helplessly. Most people only see the final transformation. They never see the nights behind it. The nights where someone sat alone questioning whether life was even worth continuing. The moments where someone stared at the ceiling feeling emotionally destroyed while the rest of the world kept moving normally. Those moments change people permanently. Because eventually a decision must be made. Collapse forever, or rebuild completely. And once a human being chooses to rebuild themselves from pain instead of surrendering to it, they become difficult to stop. There is something terrifying about someone who has already experienced emotional hell and survived it. That person no longer panics under pressure the same way ordinary people do. They no longer fear discomfort the same way others do. They already know what suffering feels like. And once pain becomes familiar instead of frightening, the human mind unlocks a completely different level of resilience. But there are two different paths people take once they reach that level of pain. Some people allow suffering to poison them. They become consumed by bitterness, revenge, hatred. They want the world to hurt because they hurt. And eventually that darkness destroys them from the inside out. But others take the same pain and weaponize it differently. They turn humiliation into discipline, loneliness into focus, rejection into self-respect. Instead of collapsing emotionally, they begin rebuilding themselves piece by piece. Quietly. Ruthlessly. Consistently. That is where real transformation begins. Because the strongest revenge is never destruction. It is evolution. Imagine someone who spent years being ignored suddenly becoming emotionally unbreakable. Imagine someone who was underestimated their entire life suddenly developing confidence, intelligence, financial independence, physical discipline, and emotional control while everyone else remained stagnant. That transformation unsettles people because it forces them to confront what they failed to see before. The world feels comfortable around weak individuals because weak individuals are predictable. They seek permission constantly. They apologize for existing. They need approval to feel valuable. But once someone realizes they survived every painful chapter of life alone, they stop needing validation entirely. And the energy around them changes immediately. Their presence becomes calmer, heavier, sharper. They speak less because they no longer need attention to feel important. They move differently because they are no longer terrified of losing people who never truly supported them. That is why emotionally rebuilt individuals often intimidate others without even trying. They understand human nature too clearly. They understand loyalty is rare. They understand comfort is temporary. They understand nobody is coming to rescue them. And once someone fully accepts that reality, they stop wasting energy pretending life is fair. They adapt instead. They sharpen themselves instead. They become resilient beyond normal understanding. Fear controls crowds. Fear controls weak minds. But once fear loses its grip on a person completely, their potential becomes dangerous. Because they stop hesitating. They stop overthinking. They stop allowing social judgment to control their future. History changes because of individuals willing to move while everyone else remains frozen. And most of those individuals were shaped by suffering long before the world ever noticed them. There are people listening to this right now who feel emotionally exhausted, betrayed, lost, broken internally. But what feels like destruction today may actually be the beginning of transformation. Because pain has a strange way of revealing who someone truly is underneath comfort, status, and validation. Some people break permanently when life becomes difficult. Others discover strength they never knew existed. The difference is not talent. It is decision. The decision to refuse surrender. The decision to keep rebuilding even when nobody claps for you. The decision to continue growing even while carrying invisible scars nobody else understands. That is what creates dangerous people. Not violence. Not anger. But relentless resilience forged through suffering. So if you ever reach a point where you feel like you have lost everything, remember this carefully. That moment can either bury you, or awaken you. The pain you are carrying right now can become the foundation of your destruction or the beginning of your evolution. But one thing is certain, once a human being survives enough suffering, they begin seeing the world differently forever. They stop worshipping comfort because comfort never truly protected them. They stop fearing failure because failure already visited them repeatedly and they survived every single time. They stop chasing acceptance because rejection taught them self-reliance. And eventually they realize the strongest version of themselves was never created during moments of happiness. It was created during the nights nobody saw. The nights filled with silence, uncertainty, exhaustion, and emotional warfare. The moments where quitting felt easier than continuing. But they continued anyway. That is where dangerous people are born. Not through violence. Not through hatred. But through endurance. Through surviving emotional storms that would have destroyed weaker minds. The strongest individuals are often people who once stood completely alone with nothing except pain and a choice. A choice to surrender permanently, or transform permanently. And when someone chooses transformation, they become difficult to manipulate because they already experienced the worst parts of themselves and survived it. That kind of person cannot be intimidated easily. Cannot be controlled easily. Cannot be broken easily. Because they already lost what they were most afraid of losing. And surviving that changes human beings at their core. The world fears people with power, money, influence, and status. But all of those things can disappear overnight. The truly dangerous person is the one whose strength was built internally through suffering because that strength cannot be taken away easily. They know how to survive emotionally. They know how to rebuild from absolute nothing. They know how to continue moving forward when nobody believes in them anymore. And once someone masters that level of resilience, they become nearly unstoppable. That is why the most dangerous person in any room is rarely the loudest person. It is rarely the richest. Rarely the most feared. The most dangerous person is the one who walked through hell alone, lost everything they thought they needed, and came back stronger because they discovered something powerful in the darkness. They discovered they no longer feared losing anything at all. And once a human being reaches that level mentally, the world can no longer control them the same way again. Because fearless people operate differently. They take risks others avoid. They speak truths others suppress. They pursue greatness without waiting for permission. And while the world is busy trying to protect comfort, those individuals quietly reshape their entire destiny. That is the final truth most people never understand. Sometimes losing everything is exactly what forces someone to become who they were always meant to be.